His death came not swiftly, but through a prolonged ordeal of unimaginable suffering. They submerged him gradually into scalding oil, while countless witnesses observed in horror. This became the tragic destiny of Marcus Atilius Regulus. Among Rome's most distinguished military commanders, Regulus had earned acclaim for his bravery and principles, yet these very virtues ultimately brought him to an end so brutal it became immortalized in history. His execution by enemy hands represents one of antiquity's most savage recorded punishments. As his narrative unfolds, we witness how a Roman champion faced torment beyond comprehension. A choice driven by principle would transform his fate into an endless nightmare of suffering that resonated throughout the ages. To comprehend Regulus's ultimate demise, we must journey back to the middle of the 3rd century before Christ. Throughout the initial Punic conflict, Rome and Carthage engaged in fierce rivalry for Mediterranean supremacy. Carthage, a prosperous maritime power in northern Africa, and Rome, the ascending republic, had battled relentlessly in devastating warfare. In 256 BC, consul Marcus Atilius Regulus brought conflict to Carthage's homeland, commanding a Roman assault force across Mediterranean waters to northern Africa, resolved to attack Rome's adversary at its core. Initially, Regulus achieved extraordinary victories. His armies triumphed on Carthaginian territory and advanced until Carthage's capital came within view. Romans anticipated imminent triumph. Emboldened by consecutive successes, Regulus presented Carthage with unreasonable peace conditions, essentially requiring complete capitulation. These demands were so extreme they shocked and infuriated the dignified Carthaginians. Instead of yielding, Carthage resolved to resist completely, declaring Rome would suffer for its presumption. Carthage quickly reversed fortunes. The Carthaginians employed an expert Spartan warrior, Xanthippus, to reorganize and command their forces. In 255 BC, during the Tunis engagement, Regulus's troops faced devastating defeat. Roman warriors perished by thousands on foreign territory. The previously unconquerable Regulus witnessed his army's destruction and massacre. Following the battle, Marcus Atilius Regulus, champion of numerous conflicts, found himself encircled and taken prisoner. Surviving Romans fled, while Regulus was displayed in shackles as Carthage's victory prize. The distinguished Roman commander now suffered imprisonment by those he had attempted to conquer. Throughout subsequent years, Regulus endured captivity in Carthaginian dungeons as warfare continued. In Rome, many presumed his death. Citizens mourned him as a fallen champion. In Carthage, however, he remained alive, representing a precious prisoner and potential negotiation tool. Around 250 BC, following years of bloody deadlock, Carthage grew exhausted by warfare's cost. The Carthaginians chose to employ Regulus for peace negotiations. They approached him with a proposal. He would return to Rome to arrange either peace agreements or prisoner exchanges according to Carthage's terms. In exchange, Regulus must pledge to return to Carthaginian custody after completing his mission, regardless of success or failure. This represented an unexpected opportunity for freedom, however temporary. Regulus gained permission to depart Carthage and revisit his homeland under promise of return. Upon reaching Rome, he wandered familiar streets, moving like someone from another world. The presumed dead general had returned from oblivion. Presented before Rome's Senate, Regulus was expected to encourage his countrymen to accept Carthage's peace proposal. Undoubtedly, Carthaginians anticipated he would advocate for war's end, so he and fellow Roman captives might escape continued suffering. Instead, Regulus performed the unexpected. Standing before the assembly, he defied Carthaginian expectations and urged Rome to refuse their offer. He maintained that Rome must persist in warfare and reject any disgraceful peace. He contended that Carthage showed weakness and should not be trusted. arguing that surrender now would waste all previous sacrifices. This represented a startling development. Regulus essentially advised the Senate to abandon him and other Roman prisoners for ultimate victory's sake. He understood completely that returning to Carthage with this response meant signing his execution order. His family and fellow senators were, according to historical records, imploring him to remain in Rome and avoid returning to Carthage, not to sacrifice his existence. Picture this moment. His spouse and children embraced him desperately, tears streaming, begging him to stay safely home. Here he stood, finally free on Roman territory. He needed only to violate his oath to survive. Yet Marcus Atilius Regulus embodied unwavering honor. A man of absolute integrity, he gently separated from his beloved family and reaffirmed his principles. Bound by oath, he declared he must return. Despite his family's frantic protests, Regulus departed for Carthage. Completely aware, he sailed toward cruel destiny. When Regulus returned to Carthage and conveyed Rome's rejection, Carthaginians erupted in fury. He had destroyed their peace hopes and, from their perspective, insulted them by encouraging Rome's continued resistance. He had rejected their offered clemency. Now, completely at their mercy, Carthage's leadership determined that swift execution was insufficient punishment for this Roman. They sought to make an example for Rome and exact vengeance for his defiance. Regulus's doom was certain. Carthaginians prepared to unleash unprecedented torture upon him, surpassing anything the ancient world had witnessed. Torment commenced in dungeon darkness. Determined to destroy the proud Roman, Regulus's captors initially denied him rest, both day and night. Whenever fatigue closed his eyes, guards prodded him with weapons or violently awakened him. Continuously, they maintained the exhausted man's consciousness. Soon, mere survival became torment. Madness emerged as distinctions between consciousness and dreams disappeared. The formerly disciplined commander was reduced to a shaking, sleep-deprived wreck. This marked only Regulus's ordeal's beginning. After days of such suffering, Carthaginians intensified their brutality. They extracted the weakened Regulus from his cell into blazing noon sunlight. He hadn't experienced daylight in weeks. The sudden illumination must have pierced his vision like daggers. Squinting and restrained, Regulus faced his tormentors and gathered spectators. Then came an act of horrific creativity. A Carthaginian torturer approached with a sharp blade. With merciless accuracy, he severed Regulus's eyelids. In one terrifying instant, the protective skin covering his eyes was sliced away. Blood streamed down Regulus's face as he grasped the complete horror of his mutilation. He could no longer shut his eyes. They abandoned Regulus to endure the ruthless sun, eyes permanently opened. The relentless North African sun beat down, searing his unprotected eyes. The pain was just too much to handle. His eyes withered, and each moment felt like fire penetrating his skull. Observers reported Regulus finally shrieked, a primal sound of anguish as his world dissolved into blinding white pain. Once an iron-willed Roman commander, he writhed completely helpless. His tormentors observed coldly, satisfied by their enemy's anguish. Yet his persecutors remained unsatisfied. They had additional plans for Regulus's destruction. For the following stage, they created cruel imprisonment. Carthaginians forced Regulus into a narrow wooden container, a box barely accommodating his frame. Inside, walls bristled with pointed iron spikes, and once sealed, Regulus remained trapped upright. No space existed to kneel or recline. Initially, he stood motionless to avoid touching the spikes, but hours elapsed and his legs weakened. Eventually, exhaustion prevailed. His body collapsed and spikes punctured his flesh. Regulus thrashed in pain, but every move just pushed the nails deeper. He was caught in a horrific snare. If he remained erect, his muscles would cramp and fail, but if he sagged or leaned, spikes would stab him. They abandoned him thus, locked in the spiked container for seemingly eternal periods. Occasionally, a guard would shake the box, causing nails to scrape against his raw injuries, producing fresh screams of suffering. Blood flowed from innumerable wounds in his arms, legs, and torso. The mighty general's body had become a pincushion of pain. One can only conceive the terror and hopelessness that overwhelmed Regulus's mind as he stood, bleeding, blinded, and sleepless, suspended between torture and collapse. Yet even this was not Regulus's ordeal's conclusion. Carthaginians had one final act to perform, one so appalling that its notoriety would resonate for thousands of years. Then arrived the ultimate punishment. In Carthage's central plaza, Carthaginians prepared Regulus's final torment. They produced an enormous iron vessel and filled it with oil. Beneath, they ignited a massive, roaring flame. News spread throughout the city of a terrible display about to occur, and crowds assembled under the scorching sun. As flames caressed the vessel's sides, oil within began bubbling and churning. Soon, thick shimmering heat filled the atmosphere, and the sharp odor of heated oil drifted across the square. Many spectators watched with dark anticipation. They knew the despised Roman commander would finally receive his punishment. Others in the multitude appeared uncomfortable, murmuring to each other in disbelief. Could they truly be about to commit this act? Finally, the cage opened, and Regulus was dragged into the blinding daylight. The mighty consul, who had once stood proudly, could now barely remain upright, yet even approaching death, Regulus did not plead for compassion. Barely awake and groaning, he could still feel the wave of heat emanating from that vessel and hear the hungry crackling of flames beneath it. Executioners lifted him onto the platform beside the giant pot. Chains rattled as they secured his arms and raised his weakened body over the opening. Silence fell over the crowd. Some Carthaginians leaned forward with vindictive pleasure. Others could barely observe the awful scene developing. Then, with a gesture, they began lowering Marcus Atilius Regulus into the boiling oil. The moment his feet contacted the roiling liquid, a horrible sizzling filled the air. They lowered him gradually. The oil rose beyond his knees, and its bubbling surface erupted with fragments of cooking flesh. Regulus's screams transformed into raw, inhuman wailing. His nerves burned. Every part of his being shrieked in torment. From front rows, some spectators watched with savage contentment. Vengeance, finally. But many others in the plaza were pale and trembling, horrified by the unspeakable suffering before them. Some turned away or shielded their eyes. A few vomited at the nauseating smell of burning flesh that now permeated the air. As boiling oil reached his chest, Regulus's screams began to fade, his voice breaking from the intensity. His body convulsed violently against the restraints. The sizzling of his skin and gurgling of bubbling oil now exceeded any cries he could produce. The once great general's face twisted in pain beyond imagination. Within the cauldron, his lower body was being cooked to destruction. When oil finally rose to his neck, Regulus's head tilted backward in a final spasm of agony. Moments later, mercifully, his screams ceased. Finally, executioners allowed his head to slip beneath the boiling surface, silencing Marcus Atilius Regulus forever. In those last moments, burning oil would have flooded his mouth and throat, a final ghastly torture as he drowned in scalding liquid. Regulus was dead. His charred remains were lifted from the cauldron for all to witness, skin blackened and peeling, limbs horribly blistered, and the crowd that had demanded this punishment now fell into stunned, eerie silence. On the platform, the twisted remnants of the Roman hero hung momentarily in the air, dripping hot oil, barely recognizable as human remains. The act was completed. Rome's proud consul had been reduced to a horrific display. For a moment no one spoke. The brutality had been so extreme that even Carthage's citizens stood in shock. Eventually, a low murmur arose in the square, exhaled in grim satisfaction. Their enemy had suffered more than anyone ever had, but many realized the spectacle they had witnessed would be seared into their memories forever. Regulus's gruesome end was intended as a message to Rome, but it left wounds on Carthage's soul as well. The crowd dispersed quietly, earlier cheers replaced by nervous whispers. In their hearts, even the victors knew they had committed something monstrous. When news of Regulus's fate reached Rome, it was met with horror and outrage. The Roman Senate and people were appalled that one of their greatest heroes had been tortured in such a barbaric manner. Mothers mourned, and fathers recounted to their children Regulus's noble sacrifice and cruel end. Regulus was proclaimed as Rome's martyr. His wife Marcia, upon learning her husband's death circumstances, was said to be overwhelmed with grief, and according to later Roman records, she exacted terrible revenge. 2 high-ranking Carthaginian prisoners held in Rome were delivered to Regulus's family, and Marcia tortured them, replicating some of the very torments inflicted upon her husband. This act of vengeance, removing the captives' eyelids and killing them, shocked even some Romans, but many viewed it as justified retribution. The cycle of cruelty had completed its circle. Carthage's intention had been to send a message of terror to discourage Rome from further warfare, but if anything, it backfired. Rather than intimidating Rome, Regulus's horrific martyrdom only sparked deeper determination to defeat Carthage. Any remaining sympathy for negotiation was extinguished. Roman soldiers entered battle with Regulus's name on their lips, swearing to avenge their fallen commander. The First Punic War continued for several more years, and Rome ultimately achieved victory. Carthage's brutality did not preserve them. In fact, it likely strengthened Rome's resolve to destroy their rival. In subsequent decades, Roman storytellers and historians recounted Regulus's tale as a stark example of Carthaginian cruelty contrasted with Roman honor. It became a legend told to schoolchildren to inspire patriotism and virtue. Regulus, the man who honored his word at the cost of his life, and the man who suffered unimaginably at the hands of a cruel enemy. The story of Marcus Atilius Regulus compels us to face both humanity's nobility and depravity. On one side, Regulus represents unshakable integrity and a leader who chose duty and honor over his own survival. On the other side, his fate demonstrates the terrifying depths of cruelty that revenge can achieve. In Regulus's suffering, we observe how warfare can drive people to heroism and atrocity equally. His death was not a clean or noble battlefield demise, but a grotesque public display. Yet it was his steadfast honor that brought him there. It leaves us with challenging, haunting questions. What would you have done in Regulus's situation? If you knew that returning to fulfill your promise meant torture beyond imagination, would you have the courage to proceed? Would you keep your oath knowing it could lead you to a boiling cauldron, or would you break your word to preserve yourself? It challenges us about the cost of principles, about how far we might go or endure for what we believe is right. His story persists precisely because it challenges us. Would we have the strength to uphold our ideals as he did, even facing unspeakable pain? Thank you for joining us and exploring this dark chapter of history together. How does Regulus's story affect you? Shocked, horrified, inspired, or some combination of all three? Share your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep explorations into history's most chilling and fascinating tales. We have many more stories of dark history to share. If you thought Regulus's fate was horrifying, just wait until our next episode, where we reveal the gruesome legend of a man boiled alive in molten silver. Stay tuned, and until next time, stay curious and stay safe.